Today's story comes from Joy, a 58-year-old woman whose own children thought they could discard her like yesterday's newspaper. This is her story of the ultimate revenge, one that changed everything forever. My name is Joy John, and I want you to understand something from the very beginning. I am not a victim. I may have been one once, but not anymore. Not after Christmas dinner 2023. Picture this: my Connecticut home, all 6,000 square feet of it, decorated for the holidays like something out of a magazine. Crystal chandeliers casting warm light over mahogany furniture, a Christmas tree that touched the 12-foot ceiling, and a dining room table that could seat 14 comfortably. Everything perfect, everything expensive, everything that my late husband Robert had insisted upon during our 28 years of marriage. I'm 58 years old, and I've been told I'm beautiful my entire life. Soft blonde curls that I still maintain religiously, striking blue eyes that Robert used to say could stop traffic, and yes, a figure that's fuller than it used to be, but one I wear with confidence. Tonight, I'd chosen a burgundy velvet dress that hugged my curves and made my eyes sparkle. I wanted to look perfect for this dinner. After all, it would be my last as their mother. The table groaned under the weight of Christmas dinner. Prime rib roasted to perfection, Yorkshire pudding, roasted vegetables with herbs from my own garden, and 3 different desserts. I'd spent 2 days preparing this meal, just as I had every Christmas for the past 30 years. My 3 adult children sat around that table with their spouses, and my 5 grandchildren, everyone chattering and laughing, completely oblivious to what was coming. Ethan, my eldest at 35, sat at what used to be his father's place, at the head of the table. Even at 35, he still carried himself with the arrogance of someone who'd never been told no. His wife Sarah, a stick-thin blonde with cold eyes, picked at her food while making snide comments about the calories in everything I'd prepared. Claire, my only daughter at 33, had inherited my looks, but none of my warmth. She spent most of dinner on her phone, occasionally looking up to criticize something about the house or the meal. Her husband Mark nodded along with everything she said, like the spineless yes man he'd always been. And then there was Jared, my baby at 30, the golden child who could do no wrong, who'd been spoiled rotten by both Robert and me. He sat there with his new wife, Jessica, wife number 3 if you're counting, looking bored and checking his Rolex every few minutes. They thought they were so clever. They thought I didn't notice the meaningful glances they'd been exchanging all evening. The way they'd huddled together, whispering when they thought I wasn't looking. They thought their sweet, naive mother was too trusting, too loving, too desperate for their approval to see what was coming. They were wrong. I was serving the chocolate trifle, Robert's favorite dessert, which I'd made every Christmas since he died 5 years ago, when Ethan suddenly stood up. He cleared his throat in that pretentious way he perfected in law school, the way that said, "Everyone needs to stop what they're doing and pay attention to me." "I'd like to make an announcement," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone of authority he used when he was about to say something he thought was important. I set down the serving spoon and looked at him with what I hoped was polite interest. "Of course, darling. What is it?" He looked around the table at his siblings, at their spouses, even at the children who were old enough to understand what was happening. Then he looked back at me with eyes that held no warmth, no love, no recognition of the woman who'd given birth to him, raised him, sacrificed for him. "We've been talking," he began, and I noticed how he said, "we," like they were a united front against a common enemy. "All of us. And we've come to a decision." I folded my hands in my lap and waited, my face serene, my heart racing with anticipation. This was it. The moment I'd been preparing for, planning for, dreaming of for months. "We've decided," Ethan continued, his voice growing stronger with each word, "that you are no longer a member of our family." The silence that followed was exquisite. Even the youngest children seemed to sense that something momentous had just happened. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the soft crackle of the fire in the fireplace, the almost imperceptible sound of my own breathing. I looked around the table at their faces. Ethan stood there with his chin raised, proud of himself for delivering what he clearly thought was a devastating blow. Claire was smirking, finally looking up from her phone to see my reaction. Jared was nodding along as if agreeing that yes, discarding their mother was absolutely the right thing to do. Their spouses looked uncomfortable but complicit. They'd known this was coming. They'd probably helped plan it. And then I did something that clearly wasn't in their script. I laughed. Not a bitter laugh, not a hysterical laugh, but a genuine, delighted laugh that came from deep in my chest. I laughed until tears formed in my eyes, until my sides hurt, until everyone at the table was staring at me like I'd lost my mind. "Oh, my darlings," I said when I finally caught my breath. "That's absolutely perfect. Perfect timing, perfect delivery, perfect everything." I reached into my clutch purse, a vintage Chanel that Robert had bought me for our 20th anniversary, and pulled out 3 gold envelopes. Each one was sealed with old-fashioned sealing wax, each one marked with a name in my elegant handwriting. Ethan, Claire, Jared. "Since we're exchanging gifts," I said, standing gracefully and walking around the table to hand each of them their envelope, "here is my parting gift for you all." Ethan took his envelope with confusion clear on his face. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. I was supposed to cry, to beg, to promise to change, to do anything to win back their love and approval. "What is this?" Claire asked, turning her envelope over in her hands. "Open them," I said, settling back into my chair with the satisfaction of a woman who'd just played her winning hand. "All of you." At the same time, they exchanged glances, clearly unsure of what to do. But curiosity won out, as I knew it would. The sound of tearing paper filled the dining room. 3 envelopes being opened simultaneously. 3 sets of hands pulling out the contents. 3 pairs of eyes scanning the documents I'd had prepared months ago. And then, exactly as I'd planned, exactly as I dreamed about during all those sleepless nights when I'd lain awake plotting their downfall, they started screaming. Claire's shriek was the first to pierce the air. A sound of pure horror that sent her children scrambling away from the table. Jared's cursing followed, words that would have earned him a mouthful of soap when he was a child. And Ethan. Oh, Ethan just stood there with his mouth hanging open, his face growing paler by the second as he read the same devastating truth over and over again. "This can't be real," Sarah whispered, reading over Ethan's shoulder. "Tell me this isn't real." But it was real. Every word, every legal document, every devastating revelation contained in those gold envelopes was absolutely, completely, irrevocably real. And I was just getting started. Before we continue with Joy's incredible story of revenge and justice, I want to remind you that you're part of something special here. These stories of women who refuse to be victims, who fight back against those who've wronged them, they matter. They inspire us to find our own strength when we need it most. Don't just listen and leave. Hit subscribe so you'll never miss another story that speaks to your soul. Ring that notification bell. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And let's build a community where women support each other through every trial and triumph. Now, let's find out exactly what was in those envelopes that made Joy's children scream. To understand the magnitude of what happened that Christmas night, you need to understand how I got there. You need to know about the years of planning, the careful documentation, the slow, methodical process of watching my children reveal their true nature and preparing accordingly. I wasn't always the calculating woman you met in that dining room. Once upon a time, I was naive. I believed in unconditional love, in the bonds of family, in the idea that if you just loved your children enough, gave them enough, sacrificed enough for them, they would love you back. I learned better. My story begins in a small town in Ohio where I was born Joy Margaret Sullivan to parents who loved me but had very little money. I was what people called a natural beauty. The kind of girl who got noticed wherever she went, who had boys lining up to ask her to prom, who could have married anyone she wanted. Robert was 15 years older than me, already established in his career as a corporate lawyer, already wealthy beyond anything my small-town imagination could grasp. When he saw me working as a receptionist at his law firm's satellite office, he pursued me with the same single-minded determination he brought to everything else in his life. We married when I was 22, and he was 37. I thought I was Cinderella, and in many ways I was. Robert gave me everything. The house, the cars, the clothes, the jewelry, the lifestyle I'd only dreamed about. But like most fairy tales, there were dark corners that took time to discover. Robert wanted children immediately, and I was happy to oblige. We tried for 2 years with no success. And I'll never forget the day Robert announced we were going to explore other options. That's how he put it. Other options. Like I was a business problem to be solved rather than his wife struggling with infertility. The other options turned out to be private adoption arrangements that Robert handled entirely through his legal connections. Within 6 months, we had Ethan, a beautiful baby boy who Robert claimed came from a teenage mother who wanted to remain anonymous. 2 years later came Claire, and 2 years after that, Jared. 3 perfect children, 3 beautiful babies whom I loved instantly and completely. Robert insisted on certain legal protections, paternity tests, special custody arrangements, documents that seemed unnecessarily complicated for straightforward adoptions. But I trusted him. I trusted that everything he did was for our family's protection. I was 28 when Jared was born, and I threw myself into motherhood with everything I had. I was going to be the perfect mother. The kind of mother who baked cookies, attended every school event, and made sure her children knew they were loved every single day. And I was for years. I was exactly that mother. I organized birthday parties that were talked about for months afterward. I volunteered at their schools, coached their Little League teams, drove them to music lessons and art classes, and every activity their hearts desired. When they were sick, I sat up all night with them. When they were sad, I held them until they felt better. When they achieved something, I celebrated like it was the greatest accomplishment in human history. Robert, meanwhile, worked. He traveled constantly, made more money than we could ever spend. And when he was home, he expected his children to be perfect little accessories to his successful life. He loved them in his way, but it was a distant, conditional love that demanded performance in return. When Robert died of a heart attack 5 years ago, suddenly, at only 68, I thought my children and I would grow closer. I thought grief would bond us together, that they'd appreciate having me there for them during the hardest time of their lives. Instead, they saw opportunity. It started small. Ethan, who'd followed his father into law, began questioning my financial decisions. "Are you sure you need such a big house, Mom? Wouldn't you be more comfortable somewhere smaller, easier to maintain?" Claire started making comments about my appearance, my clothes, my age-appropriate behavior. "Maybe it's time to think about what's next for you, Mom. You're not getting any younger." Jared, meanwhile, began having financial problems that always seemed to require my immediate assistance. Business ventures that needed just a little startup capital, investment opportunities that he couldn't pass up but needed someone to co-sign for. Emergencies that required quick cash infusions to resolve. At first, I helped gladly. These were my children, and if they needed me, I was there for them. But as the months passed, I began to notice patterns. The help was never enough. The gratitude was perfunctory at best. And worst of all, they never seemed to see me as anything more than a source of solutions to their problems. The breaking point came last year at Thanksgiving. I'd spent 3 days preparing the meal, just as I always did. I'd invited them all, just as I always did. And just as I was about to serve dessert, Claire made an announcement. "We've been talking, Mom, and we think it's time for you to start thinking about the future. Your future." I sat down the pie server and looked at her. "What do you mean?" "You're 57 years old," Ethan said, taking over the conversation with his lawyer voice. "This house is too much for you to handle alone. Your lifestyle is expensive and unsustainable long-term. We think it would be better for everyone if you started making some changes." "What kind of changes?" "Downsizing," Claire said. "Moving somewhere more appropriate for someone your age. Maybe one of those nice senior communities where you could make friends with people in your situation." "My situation, you know," Jared added, looking uncomfortable but pressed on by his siblings. "Alone, widowed, not as young as you used to be." They had it all planned out. They'd found a lovely assisted living community just 40 minutes away. They'd calculated how much money I'd have left after selling the house and paying the entrance fees. They'd even picked out a floor plan they thought would suit me. I listened to their entire presentation with growing amazement, not at their audacity, I was beginning to expect that from them, but at their complete inability to see me as anything other than a problem to be managed. And what happens to Dad's business interests? I asked. The investments, the properties, the trust funds? They exchanged glances. And I knew exactly what they'd been planning, what they'd been discussing in their private family meetings that somehow never included the actual matriarch of the family. Well, Ethan said carefully, obviously, we'd help you manage all that. Take the burden off your shoulders so you can focus on enjoying your retirement. Retirement at 57? While they divided up everything Robert and I had built together that night, after they had all gone home to their own lives, I sat in Robert's study and made a decision. If my children wanted to treat me like an obstacle to be removed, then I would remove myself, but not in the way they expected. I would beat them at their own game. The first thing I did was hire a private investigator. If my children thought they could manipulate me, I wanted to know exactly what kind of people I was dealing with. What I discovered was worse than I'd imagined. Ethan, my successful lawyer son, was embezzling money from his firm's client accounts to support a gambling addiction that had already cost him nearly $500,000. Claire, my princess daughter, was having an affair with her personal trainer while her husband worked 80-hour weeks to support her shopping addiction. And Jared, sweet charming Jared, was dealing cocaine to his wealthy friends and using me as an unwitting money launderer for his profits. My children weren't just ungrateful. They were criminals. The second thing I did was visit my own lawyer, not one of Robert's old partners, but a sharp young woman who specialized in estate planning and had no connections to my family. Together, we began the process of restructuring everything Robert had left me. And the third thing I did was the most important of all. I went back through all of Robert's papers, all the legal documents from when we had adopted the children, all the medical records and correspondence I'd kept so carefully all these years. That's when I found it. The truth that Robert had hidden from me for 30 years. The truth that would change everything. The truth that was now contained in those 3 gold envelopes, causing my children to scream at my Christmas dinner table. Because you see, Robert had lied to me about more than just the adoption arrangements. Much more. The art of revenge, I learned, is not in the dramatic gesture. It's in the 1,000 small cuts that slowly bleed your target dry. The gentle erosion that undermines their foundation until one day they wake up and discover they're standing on nothing but air. After that Thanksgiving revelation, I began what I came to think of as my soft chisel approach. Every interaction with my children became an opportunity to gather information, to plant seeds of doubt, to quietly begin withdrawing the support they'd taken for granted their entire lives. It started with money. Jared called me 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, his voice tight with stress. "Mom, I need your help. There's been a problem with one of my investments, and I need about $30,000 to cover some temporary shortfalls." In the past, I would have transferred the money immediately, no questions asked. This time, I asked questions. Lots of them. What kind of investment?
Who's managing it?
Can you send me the paperwork? Have you consulted with the financial advisor? What's your plan for paying this back? Mom, it's complicated. I don't have time to explain everything right now. I just need the money by tomorrow, or I'm going to lose everything. Then maybe you should lose everything, I said quietly. Maybe that would teach you to make better choices. The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. What did you just say to me? I said, maybe you should face the consequences of your poor decisions instead of expecting me to bail you out every time you make a mistake. Are you serious right now? This is your son asking for help. This is my son asking for money again without explanation, without gratitude, and with the assumption that I exist solely to solve his problems. He hung up on me. It was the first time in 30 years that one of my children had hung up on me, and it felt like a victory. Claire was next. She called me 3 days before her annual Christmas shopping trip to New York, a trip that traditionally involved my credit card and resulted in bills that made my accountant weep. "I've made our reservations at the plaza," she said without preamble. "Same sweet as always. I've also scheduled appointments at your usual places. Hair, nails, that little boutique on Madison Avenue you love." "I'm not going this year," I said. "What do you mean you're not going? We go every year." "You go every year. I pay for it every year." This year you're welcome to go, but you'll be paying for it yourself. I can't afford to pay for it myself. You know that. Then maybe you should plan a trip you can afford. What is wrong with you lately? First, you refuse to help Jared. Now this. Are you having some kind of breakdown? I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. No, Claire, I'm having a breakthrough. Ethan was the hardest to chip away at because he was the smartest of the three. He knew something was changing in our dynamic, and he was trying to figure out how to manage it. He came to visit me one evening in early December, bringing flowers and wine, and wearing the charming smile that had gotten him out of trouble since he was 5 years old. "Mom," he said, settling into Robert's old chair in the study, "I'm worried about you." "Are you?"
How sweet.
"The things you said to Jared, the way you treated Claire about her shopping trip, it's not like you. We're all concerned that maybe the stress of being alone in this big house is getting to you." I looked at him over my wine glass. This handsome son who'd grown into a stranger. "And what would you suggest?" "Maybe it's time to seriously consider some of the options we discussed at Thanksgiving. Not necessarily assisted living, but something smaller, more manageable. Somewhere you could be around people your own age, have built-in social activities." "You mean somewhere you wouldn't have to worry about me anymore?" "That's not," he stopped, regrouped, tried again. "Mom, we love you. We want what's best for you."
Do you?
"What you want, Ethan, is for me to quietly disappear into some facility where I won't be a burden on your conscience or an obstacle to your inheritance." His face flushed red. "That's not true, is it? When was the last time you called me just to talk? When was the last time you asked about my day, my interests, my life beyond what I can do for you?" He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. We both knew the answer. "When was the last time you told me you loved me, without wanting something in return? Mom, when was the last time you treated me like a person instead of a problem to be solved?" He left without finishing his wine, and I knew I'd hit my target. While I was slowly withdrawing emotional and financial support, I was also gathering intelligence. The private investigator I'd hired was worth every penny I paid her. Margaret Chen was a former FBI agent who specialized in white-collar crime, and she approached my children's lives with the thoroughness of someone building a criminal case, which, as it turned out, was exactly what she was doing. The reports came in weekly, each one more damning than the last. Ethan's gambling debts were worse than I'd initially thought. He owed money to 3 different casinos, 2 private bookmakers, and had borrowed against his partnership in the law firm to cover his losses. The embezzlement from client accounts wasn't a recent development. He'd been skimming money for over 2 years, always telling himself he'd pay it back when his luck turned around. Claire's affair wasn't her first. She'd been systematically cheating on Mark throughout their 10-year marriage, using the money I gave her for shopping trips to fund romantic getaways with various men. She'd also been forging my signature on checks, taking money from joint accounts we'd established for the grandchildren's education funds. And Jared, my baby, my golden child, was the worst of all. The cocaine dealing was just the tip of the iceberg. He was also involved in money laundering, tax evasion, and had used my name and address to establish shell companies that were being investigated by the IRS. My children weren't just ungrateful and entitled. They were criminals who had been using me as their unwitting accomplice for years. But even with all of this evidence, the most devastating discovery was still to come. While Margaret was investigating my children's current crimes, I was digging deeper into their origins. I spent hours in Robert's study, going through files he'd kept locked away, medical records he'd never let me see, correspondence with lawyers and doctors and adoption agencies that painted a very different picture than the one he'd given me. The first crack in the facade came when I found the real paternity test results. Robert had told me the tests were just a formality, legal protection to ensure there were no future challenges to the adoptions. What I discovered was that the tests revealed something much more significant. Robert was not the biological father of any of the children. But more shocking than that, I was not their biological mother either. The children I'd raised, loved, sacrificed for, and devoted my life to weren't adopted babies from troubled teenagers. They were the biological children of Robert's first wife, Diana, who had died in a car accident when the children were very young. Robert had lied to me about everything. He'd married me not because he loved me, but because he needed a mother for his children. He'd convinced me we were building a family together, when in reality, he was asking me to raise another woman's children while pretending they were our own. For 30 years, I'd been living a lie. For 30 years, I'd poured my heart and soul into children who weren't mine, who carried none of my DNA, who had no biological connection to me whatsoever. And now those same children wanted to discard me like I never mattered at all. That's when I decided it was time to give them exactly what they wanted. If they didn't want me as their mother, then I would stop being their mother completely, legally, irrevocably, and I would make sure they understood exactly what they were losing in the process. The gold envelopes at Christmas dinner were just the beginning. The truth has a weight to it that you can feel in your bones. When I found those documents hidden in Robert's private safe, the one he thought I didn't know about, the truth settled over me like a lead blanket, heavy and suffocating and undeniable. I was sitting in his study at 2 a.m, surrounded by manila folders and legal documents, when I found the file marked Family Medical Records, Confidential. Inside were the real paternity test results, the actual adoption paperwork, and a series of letters between Robert and his lawyers that revealed the depth of his deception. My hands shook as I read the DNA analysis reports. 3 children, 3 separate tests, all showing the same devastating result. No biological relationship to Joy Margaret Sullivan Davenport. None. Not even a distant genetic connection that might suggest some kind of family relationship. But there was more. So much more. The children weren't adopted from anonymous teenage mothers, as Robert had told me. They were his biological children with his first wife, Diana Blackwood Davenport, who had died in a car accident when Ethan was 5, Claire was 3, and Jared was just 1 year old. Robert had been a widower with 3 small children when he met me. He'd been looking for a wife who could step into Diana's role, someone young, beautiful, and naive enough to believe whatever story he told her. Someone who would love his children as her own without asking too many questions about where they'd come from. He'd found me. The letters to his lawyers revealed the calculated nature of his deception. He had specifically chosen private adoption as a cover story because it would explain why there were no extended family members involved, why the children had no connection to my relatives, and why certain legal protections were necessary. But the most devastating revelation was in a letter dated just 2 years after we married. Robert had written to his attorney expressing concern about what would happen to the children's inheritance if I ever discovered the truth about their parentage. He wanted to ensure that his assets would go to his biological children regardless of my legal status as their adoptive mother. The attorney's response was cold and precise. As long as I remained unaware of the true circumstances, I would have full parental rights and responsibilities. But if the truth ever came to light, my legal relationship to the children could be challenged, especially since the original adoption documents contained fraudulent information about their origins. Robert had been planning for the possibility of discarding me from the moment we married. I sat in that study until dawn, reading and rereading the documents, trying to process the magnitude of what Robert had done to me. He hadn't just lied about how we became a family. He'd constructed an elaborate fiction that made me a stranger in my own life. But as the sun came up and I made my 3rd cup of coffee, something else began to take root alongside the pain and betrayal. If Robert had been planning to discard me, if the children weren't legally mine in the way I'd believed, then I had options he'd never considered. I could discard them first. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Amanda Morrison, and scheduled an emergency meeting. Amanda was a sharp woman in her 40s who specialized in complex family law, and she'd been helping me restructure my estate planning since Robert's death. But this conversation would be different from anything we discussed before. I needed to understand my legal relationship to my children. I told her, sliding the DNA test results and adoption documents across her desk. Amanda read through everything twice, her expression growing more concerned with each page. When she finally looked up, her face was grave. "Joy, this is a complicated situation. These documents suggest that your adoption of the children may have been based on fraudulent information. What does that mean for me legally? It means that your parental rights exist in a legal gray area. You've been their mother for 30 years. You've supported them, raised them, made decisions for them. Any court would recognize you as their de facto parent regardless of biology. But if you wanted to challenge the adoption, if you wanted to argue that you entered into it under false pretenses, you might have grounds to legally sever the relationship. I leaned back in my chair, absorbing this information. If I severed the legal relationship, they would have no claim to my estate, no inheritance rights, and no legal standing as my next of kin. I would be, in the eyes of the law, a stranger, and my obligations to them would end immediately. No financial support, no medical decision-making authority, no legal responsibilities of any kind. I was quiet for a long moment, thinking about what this meant. How long would such a process take? If the other party contests it, it could take years. But if they don't contest it, she paused, studying my face. Joy, are you seriously considering this? I'm considering all my options. This is a nuclear option. Once you do this, there's no going back. These would be permanent, irrevocable changes to your family structure. I smiled, and I knew the expression wasn't pleasant. Amanda, they've already made it clear they don't want me as part of their family. I'm simply considering giving them what they want. Over the next 2 weeks, Amanda and I worked together to prepare all the necessary documentation. The legal process for challenging a fraudulent adoption was complex, but the evidence was overwhelming. Robert's deception was so thorough, so well documented that no court would uphold the adoption once the truth came to light. But I wanted more than just legal severance. I wanted justice. While Amanda prepared the paperwork to dissolve my parental relationship with the children, I worked with Margaret Chen, my private investigator, to document their criminal activities. If I was going to cut them out of my life, I wanted to make sure they faced consequences for what they'd done to me. Margaret's final report was devastating. She'd gathered evidence of Ethan's embezzlement, including bank records, client account statements, and testimony from a former secretary who'd been helping him cover his tracks. Claire's financial fraud was documented with forged checks, falsified account statements, and evidence of her systematic theft from the children's education funds. And Jared's drug-dealing operation was laid out in exhaustive detail, complete with photographs, transaction records, and recordings of him discussing his business with potential clients. Any one of these crimes could result in prison time. Together, they painted a picture of a family of criminals who had been using me as their unwitting accomplice and financial backer for years. But I still had one more card to play, one final revelation that would destroy any sympathy they might hope to generate when their world came crashing down. On December 20th, 5 days before Christmas, I received the final piece of the puzzle I'd been assembling. Margaret had tracked down Diana Blackwood's family, the children's real maternal relatives, who had been searching for them for over 20 years. Robert hadn't just lied about the circumstances of the adoption. He'd kidnapped his own children. After Diana's death, her parents had filed for custody of their grandchildren. They'd been wealthy, loving grandparents who desperately wanted to raise Diana's children and keep them connected to their mother's memory. But Robert had disappeared with the children before the custody hearing, claiming he was taking them away for grief counseling. He never returned. He changed their names, moved across the country, and eventually constructed the elaborate adoption fiction that had fooled everyone, including me, for 3 decades. Diana's parents, now in their 80s, had never stopped looking for their grandchildren. They'd hired private investigators, placed advertisements in newspapers, and maintained hope that someday they would be reunited with the children they'd lost. I had their contact information. I had their phone number, and I had the power to give them the reunion they'd been praying for while simultaneously destroying the fiction that had defined my life for 30 years. The children had no idea that their real maternal grandparents were still alive, still looking for them, still hoping for a relationship. They had no idea that they had aunts, uncles, and cousins who'd been mourning their disappearance for decades. And they definitely had no idea that their beloved father, Robert, the man they'd idealized since his death, had been a kidnapper who'd stolen them from their mother's family and used them as bait to trap a naive young woman into a life of service. The gold envelopes I prepared for Christmas dinner contained all of this information. The DNA test results proving we weren't related, the evidence of their criminal activities, the legal documents severing my parental rights, and the contact information for the grandparents who'd been searching for them their entire lives. But most importantly, The envelopes contained the truth about Robert, about their mother, Diana, and about the lies that had shaped their entire existence. I'd spent 30 years living a fiction. It was time for them to learn what that felt like. Christmas dinner would be perfect revenge. They wanted to discard me as their mother.
Fine.
I would show them exactly what they were choosing to lose and exactly who they really were underneath all the lies Robert had told them. The screaming at the dinner table was just the beginning. I want to pause here for a moment to acknowledge the power of truth. Joy's story shows us that sometimes the most devastating weapon against those who've wronged us isn't violence or cruelty. It's simply revealing the truth they've been running from. If you're finding strength in Joy's journey, if her refusal to be a victim resonates with you, please hit that like button and share the story. Your engagement helps us reach more women who need to hear these stories of courage and transformation. Now, let's see what happens when Joy's children discover the truth about their entire lives. December 15th, 10 days before Christmas, I decided to test the waters. I needed to see how my children would react to hints about what was coming. I needed to gauge their level of panic when they realized their comfortable world might be shifting. I invited them all to Sunday dinner. Nothing formal, just family time, I said. They came reluctantly, still annoyed with my recent unreasonable behavior regarding money and support. They thought they were coming to a reconciliation dinner where their poor, confused mother would apologize for her recent coldness and promise to return to her role as their personal ATM. They had no idea they were walking into a preview of their destruction. I'd prepared a lovely meal. Nothing too elaborate, but good enough to put them at ease. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans from my garden. Comfort food that reminded them of their childhoods when I'd been the devoted mother who existed solely to serve their needs. We were halfway through dinner when I decided to drop the first hint. I've been thinking a lot about family lately, I said casually, cutting my chicken with deliberate precision. About what family really means, about the bonds that hold us together. Ethan looked up from his plate, already alert to the possibility that this conversation was heading somewhere he didn't want to go. That's nice, Mom. Family is important. Yes, it is. But I've been wondering what makes someone family. Is it blood? Is it love? Is it the choice to treat each other with respect and kindness? Claire set down her fork. What are you getting at? Nothing specific, dear. Just philosophical musings from an old woman. I smiled sweetly, enjoying the tension I could see building around the table. Although I have been doing some research into our family history, did you know there are genealogy services now that can trace your bloodline back centuries? Jared shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Why would you want to do that? Curiosity mainly. I've always wondered about your biological parents, about the families you came from. Don't you ever wonder about your real heritage? The silence that followed was electric. They all knew they were adopted, of course, but it was something we rarely discussed. In their minds, I was their mother, Robert was their father, and their biological origins were irrelevant ancient history. If only they knew. We don't need to know about our biological parents, Ethan said firmly. You and Dad were our real parents. That's all that matters. Of course, I agreed. Although legally speaking, adoption can be quite complicated, especially when there are questions about the circumstances under which it took place. Claire's face went pale. What do you mean, questions about circumstances? Oh, probably nothing. Just some inconsistencies I noticed while going through your father's papers. Minor things, really. Although my lawyer did seem concerned when I showed her some of the documents. That was a lie. Amanda had been concerned, but not for the reasons I was implying. Still, the effect on my children was immediate and gratifying. What kind of inconsistencies? Jared demanded. Administrative details, I said vaguely. Nothing you need to worry about. Although it did make me think about how temporary family relationships can be, how quickly they can change when circumstances change. I took a sip of my wine, letting that thought settle over the table like fog. Speaking of changes, I continued, I've been making some adjustments to my estate planning. Nothing dramatic, just updating some beneficiary information, clarifying some inheritance details. Ethan's lawyer instincts kicked in immediately. What kind of adjustments? Prudent ones. My financial advisor suggested I review everything after some recent developments came to light. I chose my words carefully. Developments could mean anything. Their criminal activities, the truth about their adoption, my knowledge of their plan to discard me. Let them wonder which secrets I'd uncovered. Mom, Claire said, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. If there's something you want to discuss with us, just say it directly. Oh, there will be plenty of time for direct conversation very soon. Actually, I'm planning something special for Christmas dinner this year. A real family discussion about our future together, or apart, as the case may be. The rest of dinner passed in tense silence. My children picked at their food, exchanged meaningful glances, and clearly struggled with whether to press me for more information or wait to see what I was planning. After they left, earlier than usual, claiming various obligations, I sat in my kitchen and felt the deep satisfaction of a hunter who'd successfully flushed her prey from cover. They knew something was coming. They were scared, and they had no idea how to stop it. Over the next week, I received several phone calls from each of them.
Casual check-ins, they said.
Just wanted to see how I was doing. Was I feeling all right? Had I been under any stress lately? Maybe I should see a doctor just to make sure everything was okay with my health. They were fishing, trying to determine if I was having some kind of breakdown that would explain my recent behavior. The idea that their sweet, naive mother might be plotting against them was so foreign to their worldview that they couldn't even consider it seriously. Ethan was the most persistent. He called me every other day, with increasingly transparent attempts to gauge my mental state. Mom, Sarah was saying she's noticed you seem a little different lately, more distant. We're just worried that maybe you're feeling isolated in that big house.
I'm perfectly fine, Ethan.
Never been better. Actually, it's just that some of the things you said at dinner last week about family, adoption, and estate planning, it seemed like maybe you were feeling anxious about something. Not anxious, dear. Excited. Excited about what? Christmas dinner. I have some wonderful surprises planned for all of you. That seemed to be the answer he was dreading most. Claire took a different approach. She showed up at my house unannounced on December 22nd, claiming she wanted to help me prepare for Christmas dinner. You don't need to do all this work yourself, Mom. Why don't you let me handle some of the cooking, or we could have dinner catered this year. Take some of the pressure off you. I looked at her as she stood in my kitchen, this beautiful daughter who'd spent years systematically stealing from me while pretending to care about my welfare. There's no pressure, Claire. Everything is already planned. Every detail has been carefully prepared. What kind of details? The menu, the seating arrangements, the after-dinner entertainment. I think everyone will find it very illuminating. She left looking even more worried than when she'd arrived. But it was Jared who surprised me the most. He called me on December 23rd, his voice shaking with what sounded like genuine emotion. Mom, I need to tell you something about the money you wouldn't lend me last month. Yes, I wasn't entirely honest with you about what I needed it for. My heart started beating faster. Was he actually going to confess? Was my baby going to try to come clean before Christmas dinner destroyed everything?
I'm listening.
The truth is I've been having some problems. Financial problems. I've made some bad decisions. Gotten involved with some people I shouldn't have gotten involved with. What kind of people? People who loan money to people like me. People who expect to be paid back on schedule no matter what. He wasn't confessing to drug dealing. He was spinning a story that would make me feel sorry for him without admitting to any actual crimes. Are you in danger, Jared? I could be if I don't get the money together soon. His voice broke, and I realized he was crying.
Mom, I'm scared.
I don't know what to do. For just a moment, I felt the old maternal instinct kick in, the desire to protect my child, to fix his problems, to make everything better. For just a moment, I almost offered to help him. Then I remembered the photographs Margaret had shown me. Jared handing packages of cocaine to well-dressed clients outside expensive restaurants. Jared counting stacks of cash in his apartment. Jared laughing with his friends about how easy it was to manipulate his crazy old mother into funding his lifestyle. Jared, I said gently, have you considered that maybe it's time to face the consequences of your choices? What do you mean? I mean, maybe running to mommy to fix your problems isn't the answer anymore. Maybe it's time for you to be a man and deal with your own mistakes. The silence stretched out between us. I can't believe you're going to let me get hurt over money, he finally said, his voice cold now that manipulation had failed. I'm not letting anything happen to you, Jared. You created this situation. You can find a way out of it. You know what?
Fine.
We'll see how you feel about family loyalty after Christmas dinner. He hung up, and I knew he'd just confirmed what I already suspected. They planned their announcement for Christmas dinner, probably thinking it would be the perfect dramatic moment to discard me publicly. They had no idea I'd been planning my own announcement for the same occasion. December 24th, Christmas Eve. I spent the entire day preparing, not just the meal. That was the easy part, but the emotional preparation for what was coming. I was about to destroy 3 lives, reveal devastating truths, and permanently sever relationships that had defined my existence for 30 years. I thought about Diana, the children's real mother, whose parents were still alive and still searching for them. I thought about Robert, whose memory I was about to desecrate with the truth about his deceptions. I thought about the woman I'd been when I married him, young, naive, trusting, eager to love and be loved. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous. I also thought about my grandchildren, the innocent victims. In all of this, they would lose their grandmother, learn terrible things about their parents, and have their entire family structure destroyed in one evening. I felt genuinely sorry for them, but I reminded myself that they were better off knowing the truth about the people raising them. As I went to bed on Christmas Eve, I felt the same calm anticipation I imagined a general feels before a decisive battle. Everything was in place. Every weapon was loaded. Every strategy had been rehearsed. Tomorrow, my children would get exactly what they'd asked for. Now you understand what led to that moment at the Christmas dinner table when 3 adults opened 3 gold envelopes and began screaming. But you don't yet understand the full scope of what they discovered or the devastating precision with which I'd crafted their destruction. Let me take you inside those envelopes and show you exactly what each of my children found waiting for them. Ethan's envelope contained 5 documents. The first was a copy of the original DNA test results showing no biological relationship between him and either Robert or me. The second was a complete dossier on his gambling addiction and embezzlement activities, including bank records, casino statements, and testimony from his former secretary, who'd been helping him cover his tracks. The third document was a letter from Diana's parents, his real maternal grandparents, expressing their joy at finally finding him and their hope for reconciliation after 30 years of searching. The fourth was a legal notice that I had filed a report with the Connecticut Bar Association detailing his embezzlement of client funds. The fifth document was a warrant for his arrest that would be executed within 48 hours. Claire's envelope contained a similar collection of devastating revelations. The DNA results, evidence of her systematic theft from the children's education funds, photographs of her with various lovers taken by Margaret's surveillance team, and a letter from Mark's divorce attorney notifying her that her husband was filing for divorce and seeking full custody of their children based on evidence of her infidelity and financial crimes. She also received a notice that the IRS had been informed of her tax evasion schemes and would be conducting a full audit of her finances going back 7 years. But it was Jared's envelope that contained the most personal touch. Along with his DNA results and evidence of his drug-dealing operation, I'd included something special, a recording of him talking to his friends about me. Margaret had captured this conversation at a bar just 2 weeks earlier, where Jared was bragging about how easy it was to manipulate his pathetic old mother into giving him money. He'd laughed about my weight, made cruel jokes about my loneliness, and described in detail how he planned to have me declared incompetent so he could gain control of my assets. The old cow is so desperate for love. She'll believe anything I tell her, he'd said, his voice clear and cruel on the recording. A few tears, some story about being in trouble, and she hands over whatever I need. It's like having a personal ATM that runs on guilt. His friends had laughed, and Jared had continued. The best part is she actually thinks we love her. She has no idea we're just waiting for her to die so we can split up all that money. My brother and sister think we should put her in a home now, but I like having her available for emergencies. The recording was 18 minutes long, and every minute contained something more devastating than the last. All 3 envelopes also contained copies of the legal documents I'd filed to dissolve my adoptive relationship with them, effective immediately. No more inheritance. No more family connection. No more mother. When they opened those envelopes and began reading, the sounds that came out of them weren't quite human. Claire's shriek was high and piercing, like an animal caught in a trap. Jared's cursing was violent and creative, a stream of profanity that seemed to go on forever. But it was Ethan's silence that was most unnerving. He just stood there reading and rereading the documents, his face growing paler with each pass. Their spouses reacted with equal horror. Sarah grabbed Ethan's papers and began reading over his shoulder, her hand flying to her mouth when she reached the embezzlement evidence. Mark looked at the photographs of Claire with her lovers and quietly pushed back from the table, his face a mask of disgust and betrayal. Jessica, Jared's newest wife, listened to about 30 seconds of the recording before she started laughing, not with humor, but with the bitter realization that she'd married a monster. The grandchildren, thank God, were young enough that most of them didn't understand what was happening. The older ones looked confused and frightened by their parents' reactions. But I'd specifically timed this revelation for after they'd finished eating, knowing they'd be tired and ready to play in the living room. "This isn't real," Claire kept saying, even as she stared at the photographs of herself that Margaret had taken. "This can't be real." "Oh, but it is," I said calmly, cutting myself another piece of turkey, as if nothing unusual was happening. Every document, every photograph, every recording, all absolutely authentic. "You can't do this," Ethan said, his lawyer training finally kicking in. "You can't just dissolve an adoption that's been legal for 30 years. Actually, I can. When the adoption was based on fraudulent information, when the biological relationships were misrepresented, when the adopting parent was deceived about the circumstances. Yes, it can absolutely be dissolved." "We'll fight this," Claire said, her voice shaking with rage. "We'll contest it in court. We'll prove you're incompetent, that you're having some kind of breakdown." I smiled at her. This daughter, who'd spent years undermining my confidence, making me doubt my own judgment, trying to convince me I was too old and foolish to manage my own life. "With what money, Claire? Your accounts are already frozen pending the IRS audit. Mark is filing for divorce and seeking control of all marital assets. You're about to be arrested for check fraud and embezzlement. Exactly what resources do you think you'll have to fight me in court?" She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again as the reality of her situation began to sink in. "And Ethan," I continued, turning to my eldest son, "you might want to focus on preparing your defense for the embezzlement charges rather than worrying about inheritance law. I understand that lawyer prisoners don't fare particularly well in prison." "How long have you known?" Jared asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "About which part? Your drug dealing? Your theft of my money? Your plan to have me declared incompetent? Or did you mean how long have I known about your charming conversation at Murphy's bar where you called me a pathetic old cow?" His face went white. "You recorded me?" "I had you recorded. There's a difference. And just so you know, copies of everything, all the evidence, all the recordings, all the legal documents have been sent to the appropriate authorities, the DEA, the FBI, the IRS, the Connecticut Bar Association, and several news outlets that specialize in stories about wealthy families destroying themselves through greed and stupidity." The table erupted in chaos again. Everyone talking at once, voices raised in panic and accusation and desperate attempts to find a way out of the trap I'd constructed for them. But I wasn't finished yet. "There's one more thing," I said, raising my voice to cut through the noise. "Something you should know about your father, about your real mother, about the lies that have shaped your entire lives." The chaos stopped. Everyone turned to look at me. "Your father didn't adopt you from anonymous teenage mothers. You're the biological children of his first wife, Diana Blackwood Davenport, who died in a car accident when you were very young." The silence was complete. "Now, after Diana's death, her parents filed for custody of you. They wanted to raise you, love you, keep you connected to your mother's memory. But Robert kidnapped you before the custody hearing. He changed your names, moved across the country, and constructed an elaborate fiction to hide you from the family that had been searching for you for 30 years. Claire made it sound like she was choking. Your real grandparents are still alive. They're in their 80s now, but they've never stopped looking for you. They've hired private investigators, placed advertisements, and prayed every day that they would find Diana's children. You're lying, Ethan said, but his voice lacked conviction. Am I? Their names are James and Margaret Blackwood. They live in Portland, Oregon. Their phone number is in your envelopes along with a letter they wrote when I contacted them last week. They're hoping you'll call them. They have photographs of your mother, stories about her childhood, family heirlooms they've been saving for you. I stood up from the table, smoothing my dress, preparing to deliver the final blow. You see, my dear children, you wanted to discard me because I wasn't really family. But it turns out I'm not your family either. I never was. I was just a woman your father used to provide free child care while he built his career and hid you from the people who actually loved you. I picked up my purse and headed toward the door. The house has been sold. The new owners take possession on January 15th. I suggest you remove your belongings before then, although given your upcoming legal troubles, storage might be difficult to arrange. I paused at the dining room doorway and looked back at the wreckage of what had once been my family. Merry Christmas, my darlings. I hope you enjoy your new lives as much as I'm going to enjoy mine. And then I walked out of that house, out of their lives, and into the freedom I'd been planning for months. The screaming followed me all the way to my car. I drove to the Marriott downtown, where I'd booked the penthouse suite for the next month. The hotel staff had been expecting me. I'd made arrangements weeks ago, knowing I wouldn't be welcome in my own home after Christmas dinner. As I settled into the luxurious suite with a glass of champagne and a view of the city lights, I allowed myself to feel the full satisfaction of a plan executed to perfection. Somewhere across town, my former children were dealing with the consequences of their choices, and I was finally free. The first call came at 11:47 p.m. Ethan's number. I let it ring. The second call came at 11:52 p.m. Claire. I let that one ring, too. By midnight, all three of them had called multiple times, left voicemails that ranged from desperate pleading to furious threats, and sent text messages that revealed just how thoroughly their world had collapsed in the span of a single evening. Ethan's voicemails were the most interesting. His lawyer's training had kicked in, and he was trying to find legal angles to challenge what I'd done. Mom, this is insane. You can't dissolve a 30-year-old adoption based on technicalities. No court will uphold this. Call me back so we can discuss this rationally. By the third message, his tone had shifted. The embezzlement charges are trumped up. You don't understand the complexities of trust account management. I can explain everything if you'll just give me a chance. By the fifth message, he was begging. Please, Mom. I know I've made mistakes, but we can work this out. We're still family. That has to count for something. Claire's messages were pure emotion. Sobbing, pleading, bargaining.
I'm sorry, Mom.
I'm so sorry. I know I said things, did things I shouldn't have, but you can't destroy our entire family over some arguments. Please call me back. Please. But it was Jared's messages that revealed the most about who he really was underneath the charm and manipulation. This is insane, Joy. You can't do this to us. I don't care what you think you know or what lies people have told you. We're your children, and you owe us. Joy, not Mom. He dropped the pretense entirely. You think you're so smart, but you have no idea what you've started. There are people who won't be happy about my business being disrupted. People who know where you live, where you go, what you do. You better think carefully about whether this is really the war you want to start. I saved that message. Threats would only make his legal situation worse. The next morning brought a knock on my hotel room door. I looked through the peephole to see two police officers and a woman in a business suit. Mrs. Davenport.
I'm Detective Rodriguez.
We'd like to speak with you about some reports you filed regarding your children. I invited them in and offered coffee, which they declined. The woman introduced herself as Agent Sarah Chun from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. We've reviewed the evidence you provided regarding embezzlement, money laundering, and drug trafficking, Agent Chun said. It's quite comprehensive. We'll need you to come in and give a formal statement, but based on what you've given us, we'll be making arrests within the next 24 hours. All three of them? Yes, ma'am. The evidence is overwhelming. Detective Rodriguez leaned forward. I do need to ask, are you concerned about your safety? One of your sons left some concerning voicemails that could be interpreted as threats. I played Jared's message for them. Both officers exchanged glances. We'll be adding threatening a witness to his charges, Agent Chun said. And we'll have a patrol car check on you periodically until he's in custody. After they left, I called Amanda, my lawyer, to check on the legal proceedings. The adoption dissolution is moving faster than I expected, she told me. Given the evidence of fraud in the original proceedings and the fact that none of the parties are contesting it, they're not contesting it. Their lawyers are advising them to focus on their criminal defenses rather than fighting a civil matter they can't win. The adoption should be officially dissolved within 2 weeks and the estate clean. Everything transfers to the children's charities you designated except for the trust fund you set up for yourself. No one can challenge it because, as of the dissolution, they have no legal standing to contest your will. Perfect. That afternoon, I received a call from an unexpected source. Mark, Claire's soon-to-be ex-husband. Mrs. Davenport, this is Mark. I wanted to thank you. Thank me for what? Thank me for giving me the evidence I needed to protect my children. I've been trying to document Claire's behavior for years, but I never had proof. What you gave me, it's going to ensure I get full custody. How are the children handling this? They're confused, obviously, but they're also relieved. They've been living with Claire's instability for years. They know something was wrong, even if they couldn't articulate it.
And you?
How are you handling it? He was quiet for a moment. Honestly, I'm relieved, too. I've been living with a stranger for years. Someone who wasn't the woman I married. Finding out about the affairs, the stealing, the lies. It explains so much about why our marriage felt so hollow. After he hung up, I realized that my revenge had created some unexpected positive outcomes. Mark and his children would be free from Claire's toxicity. Sarah might finally understand what kind of man she'd married when Ethan's gambling addiction was exposed. And Jessica, well, Jessica was young enough to start over without too much damage. The arrests happened that evening. I watched the news coverage from my hotel suite, seeing perp walks and mugshots of the people who'd once been my children. The reporters couldn't get enough of the story. Wealthy family destroyed by greed, prominent lawyer caught in embezzling, society wife revealed as a serial adulterer and thief, youngest son running a drug empire while living off his elderly mother. It was everything I'd hoped for and more. But the most satisfying moment came 3 days later when I received a call from Portland, Oregon. Is this Joy Davenport? The voice was elderly but strong, with a slight tremor that spoke of advanced age and overwhelming emotion. Yes, this is Joy. This is Margaret Blackwood. James, and I can't thank you enough for what you've done. 30 years we've been searching for Diana's children. 30 years. I could hear her crying softly. Are they going to call us? I don't know, I said. Honestly, they're dealing with some serious legal problems right now, but I made sure they have her contact information and I told them how much you've missed them. We have so much to tell them about their mother. So many stories, so many pictures. We've kept everything, hoping someday. Mrs. Blackwood, you should know that they might not be the people you're hoping they'll be. They've lived very different lives than what you might have imagined. We don't care, she said firmly. They're Diana's children. They're our family. Whatever they've done, wherever they've been, we love them. After we hung up, I sat in my hotel room thinking about the difference between the love Margaret Blackwood described and the conditional, transactional relationship I'd had with the children I'd raised. Real love didn't demand perfection or gratitude. Real love didn't keep score or threaten abandonment when disappointed. Real love was what I'd given them for 30 years and what they'd never given me in return. That night, I slept better than I had in months. The next few weeks brought a parade of desperate attempts to contact me, each more pathetic than the last. My former children tried everything: phone calls, emails, showing up at the hotel, sending intermediaries, even attempting to contact me through social media. I ignored them all. Ethan was the most persistent, probably because his legal situation was the most dire. Embezzling client funds carried serious federal penalties, and his gambling debts had left him with no resources to mount an effective defense. He finally ambushed me at the hotel's restaurant, where I was having lunch with Rose, my oldest friend who'd flown in from Ohio to support me through this transition. "Mom," he said, appearing suddenly at our table like a desperate ghost. "Please, just 5 minutes." He looked terrible. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair uncombed, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and stress. The golden boy who'd once commanded every room he entered now looked like exactly what he was, a criminal facing the consequences of his choices. "I'm sorry," I said politely, "but I don't know you."
Please don't do this.
"I know you're angry, but we can work this out. We're still family." "No," I said, cutting into my salmon with deliberate precision. "We're not. The legal documents dissolving our relationship were finalized yesterday. We are now officially and legally strangers. That's just paperwork. You raised me. You loved me. That has to count for something." I looked up at him then, this man who'd once been my little boy, whom I'd rocked to sleep and comforted through nightmares and cheered for at soccer games. "You're right. I did love you. For 30 years, I loved you more than my own life. And you repaid that love by stealing from me, lying to me, and planning to have me declared incompetent so you could control my assets. I never meant for it to go that far, didn't you? Because I have recordings of you discussing exactly that plan with your siblings. I have documentation of meetings with lawyers about guardianship proceedings. I have evidence that you've been systematically undermining my credibility with my doctors, my financial advisors, and my friends." His face crumbled. I was desperate. The gambling, the debts. I wasn't thinking clearly.
No, Ethan.
"You were thinking very clearly. You were thinking about how to use my love for you to solve your problems, just like you've been doing your entire life." I signaled the waiter for the check. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have plans this afternoon." "What plans?" I smiled at him, and I knew the expression was cold enough to freeze water. "I'm meeting with a documentary filmmaker who's interested in telling the story of how 3 adopted children systematically abused their elderly mother until she was forced to disown them to protect herself." The color drained from his face. "You wouldn't. Wouldn't I? It's quite a compelling story, actually. Wealthy family, shocking betrayals, criminal activity, the ultimate revenge. The kind of story that trends on social media for weeks." I stood up, leaving money on the table for the meal. "Oh, and Ethan, if you ever approach me in public again, I'll have you arrested for harassment. The restraining order I filed yesterday should have been served to you by now." Rose and I walked away, leaving him standing alone in that expensive restaurant, looking like the broken man he'd become. Claire tried a different approach. She sent her children, my former grandchildren, to the hotel with a letter. I was walking through the lobby when I saw them. Emma, age 12, and David, age 10, sitting on one of the elegant sofas in their school uniforms, looking lost and confused. My heart clenched. These children were innocent victims in their parents' war, and seeing them in this situation made me genuinely sad for the first time since Christmas dinner. "Grandma Joy," Emma stood up when she saw me, her eyes hopeful and scared. "Hello, Emma." "David." I kept my voice gentle but formal. "What are you doing here?" "Mommy said to give you this." Emma held out an envelope with my name written in Claire's handwriting. "She said to tell you that she's sorry and she loves you, and please come home." I took the letter but didn't open it. "How did you get here?" "Daddy brought us," David said. "But he's waiting in the car. He said he can't talk to you because of legal stuff." Smart mom. Mark was protecting himself while still allowing the children to attempt one last connection with the woman who'd been their grandmother for their entire lives. "Emma, David, I want you to understand something very important. The problems between me and your mother have nothing to do with you. You're wonderful children, and I love you very much." "Then why won't you come home?" Emma asked, tears starting to form in her eyes. "Because sometimes adults make choices that have consequences. Your mother made some very bad choices, and now she has to face the results of those choices." "But we miss you," David said. And mommy cries all the time now. I knelt down, so I was at their eye level. I miss you too, more than you know. But I can't be part of your family anymore because your mother hurt me very badly and I need to protect myself. Will we ever see you again? The question broke my heart. I don't know, sweetheart. That will depend on a lot of things that are out of my control right now. I hugged them both, breathing in the scent of their hair, memorizing the feeling of their small arms around my neck. Then I walked them back to the car where Mark was waiting. I'm sorry about this, he said through the driver's window. Claire convinced them to write you a letter, and they insisted on delivering it themselves. It's fine.
They needed to see me to understand that this isn't about them.
For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. What Claire did to you, it was unforgivable. That evening, I finally read Claire's letter. It was exactly what I expected. Desperate pleading mixed with attempts at manipulation, promises to change, claims that she'd been influenced by her brothers, threats of suicide if I didn't forgive her. But buried in the hysteria was one line that revealed everything I needed to know about how Claire really saw me. I know I took some money, but you have so much, and I needed it more than you did. I was just borrowing from my inheritance anyway. Borrowing from her inheritance. Even in her apology letter, even while begging for forgiveness, she still saw my money as rightfully hers. I threw the letter away without finishing it. Jared's approach was the most predictable. He tried to intimidate me. He called my hotel room at 3 a.m., clearly drunk or high, his voice slurred with chemicals and rage. You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you can destroy my life and just walk away. Jared, I said calmly, you're violating the restraining order by calling me. This conversation is being recorded, and I'll be forwarding it to the police in the morning.
Good.
Let them hear this. Let them hear what happens when you mess with people's lives for no reason. No reason? You were dealing drugs, stealing my money, and planning to have me declared incompetent. Those seem like pretty good reasons to me. I was protecting myself. Do you have any idea how much money I owe to how many dangerous people? I know exactly how much money you owe and to whom. My investigator was very thorough. Then you know what's going to happen to me if I can't pay them back. Jared, you created this situation. You chose to deal drugs. You chose to gamble with money you didn't have. You chose to threaten your mother when she wouldn't enable your criminal behavior. These are all your choices. You could fix this. You could pay off my debts, hire me a good lawyer, make this all go away. I could, but I won't.
Why?
Why are you doing this to us? I was quiet for a long moment, thinking about how to answer that question. Because, Jared, you asked me to. All of you. You told me I wasn't part of your family anymore. You were right. I'm not. And now you get to live with what that actually means. He hung up, cursing, and I went back to sleep with the satisfaction of a woman who'd finally stopped letting other people's poor choices become her emergencies. The next morning, I forwarded the recording to Detective Rodriguez, who assured me that Jared's bail would be revoked and he'd be returned to jail pending trial. 3 weeks after Christmas dinner, all 3 of my former children were in custody, their assets frozen, their lives in ruins. Their spouses had either filed for divorce or were in the process of doing so. Their children were safe with responsible caregivers who would protect them from the chaos their parents had created. And I was free. Free to live my life without constantly managing other people's crises. Free to spend my money on things that brought me joy instead of enabling destructive behavior. Free to choose relationships based on mutual respect and genuine affection instead of obligation and manipulation. It was the best Christmas gift I'd ever given myself. 3 months after Christmas dinner, I bought a house. Not just any house, a stunning Victorian mansion overlooking the ocean in Bar Harbor, Maine. 12 rooms, original hardwood floors, a wraparound porch that caught the sunrise, and enough space for me to live exactly as I pleased without anyone else's input or approval. The house came with a history like most old Maine properties. It had been built in 1887 by a sea captain for his bride, who had left him after 2 years of marriage, taking their infant daughter and disappearing into what the locals called a more suitable arrangement. The captain had lived alone in the house for 40 more years, turning it into a showcase of his travels and adventures, filling it with treasures from around the world. I felt a kinship with both the captain and his bride. We'd all learned the hard way that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones most likely to betray us, and sometimes the best revenge is simply living well without them. The house needed work. Months of renovations to update the plumbing and electrical systems, restore the original millwork, and transform it into a 21st century home that honored its 19th century bones. I threw myself into the project with the enthusiasm of a woman who finally had complete control over her environment. For the first time in my adult life, every decision was mine alone. The color of the walls, the fabric for the curtains, the style of the furniture, the books on the shelves, everything reflected my taste, my preferences, my vision of what a home should be. I chose deep, rich colors that made the rooms feel warm and dramatic. Burgundy in the dining room, forest green in the library, soft gold in the living room. I furnished the spaces with antiques that had stories, pieces that spoke to me of history and character, and the kind of enduring beauty that improves with age. The master bedroom became my sanctuary, decorated in shades of blue that echoed the ocean outside my windows. I bought the most luxurious bedding I could find, installed a fireplace for winter mornings, and created a sitting area where I could drink coffee and watch the sunrise over the water. But my favorite room was the library, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive stone fireplace, leather chairs that invited hours of reading, and windows that framed the ocean like living paintings. I filled the shelves with books I'd always wanted to read, first editions of my favorite novels, and poetry collections that spoke to my soul. This was where I spent most of my time reading, writing, and thinking about the woman I was becoming in the absence of obligation and expectation. The renovations took 6 months, and during that time I lived in a suite at the local inn, getting to know the town and its people. Bar Harbor was the kind of place where summer brought tourists and winter brought solitude, where locals protected each other's privacy and respected the healing power of distance from complicated pasts. I made friends slowly, but genuinely. There was Martha, who owned the bookstore and shared my love of literary fiction. Helen, who ran the local art gallery and convinced me to try my hand at watercolor painting, and Dr. Patricia Wells, a retired psychiatrist who became my walking companion and the closest thing to a therapist I'd ever had. Patricia was the first person I told the complete truth about my situation. We were walking along the shore path one foggy morning in May when she asked the question I'd been dreading and anticipating for months. "Joy, you've been here almost a year now, and you've never mentioned family. No children calling, no grandchildren visiting. Most women our age can't stop talking about their families." I stopped walking and looked out at the ocean, gray and infinite in the morning mist. I had a family once. 3 children, 5 grandchildren. I spent 30 years devoted to them, sacrificing everything for their happiness and success. What happened? They decided I was no longer useful to them. So I decided they were no longer family to me. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. That must have been devastating. It was liberating. I told her everything then. The years of manipulation and financial abuse, the discovery that I wasn't their biological mother, the Christmas dinner confrontation, the legal proceedings that severed our relationship, the criminal charges that had destroyed their lives. When I finished, Patricia was quiet for several minutes. "Do you regret it?" she finally asked. "Which part? Any of it?" "All of it." I thought about the question seriously. Did I regret loving them so completely for so long? Did I regret discovering the truth about their character? Did I regret fighting back when they tried to discard me? "No," I said finally. "I regret that it took me so long to see them clearly. I regret that I enabled their behavior for years by never setting boundaries or demanding respect. But I don't regret protecting myself when I finally understood what they really were." "And you don't miss them?" "I miss the people I thought they were. But those people never really existed. They were just roles they played to get what they wanted from me." That conversation marked a turning point in my healing. I stopped feeling like a woman in exile and started feeling like a woman who'd found her way home. By the time I moved into my renovated house that September, I'd established a life that felt authentic in a way nothing had for decades. I had routines that pleased me, friendships that nourished me, and hobbies that challenged me. I started each day with coffee on the porch, watching the sunrise and planning my day according to my own desires rather than other people's demands. I painted watercolors that captured the changing light on the ocean. I read voraciously, working my way through classics I never had time for when I was managing everyone else's crises. I also started writing. What began as journal entries processing my experiences evolved into something more substantial, a memoir about financial elder abuse, family manipulation, and the courage it takes to choose yourself over toxic relationships. The writing was therapeutic in ways I hadn't expected. Each chapter one completed felt like another step away from victimhood and toward empowerment. I wasn't just telling my story, I was reclaiming it. Winter in Maine was a revelation. The tourists disappeared. The town settled into its quiet rhythm. And I discovered the profound peace that comes from true solitude. I spent long evenings by my library fireplace reading, writing, and thinking about the woman I was becoming. I was 59 years old, and I felt like I was just beginning to live. But perhaps the most unexpected gift of my new life was the absence of drama. No midnight phone calls about emergencies that required immediate financial intervention. No family gatherings where I had to navigate competing personalities and hidden agendas. No constant worry about whether my children were making good choices or how their poor decisions might impact me. For the first time in 30 years, my life was my own. I did receive occasional updates about my former children through various sources. Ethan had been sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for embezzlement and was serving his time at a minimum security facility in Connecticut. Claire had received 2 years for check fraud and tax evasion and was living in a halfway house after her release, working as a clerk in a grocery store while trying to rebuild her relationship with her children. Jared had received the harshest sentence, 8 years for drug trafficking, money laundering, and threatening a witness. He was serving his time at a medium security prison in Massachusetts and had apparently become something of a cautionary tale among the other inmates about the dangers of threatening your mother. I felt no satisfaction in their punishment and no sympathy for their situation. They were simply people who had once been part of my life and now weren't, like former neighbors or old colleagues whose paths had diverged from mine. The only news that truly interested me came from Portland, Oregon. Margaret Blackwood called me in November to tell me that Ethan had contacted them from prison. He had written a letter acknowledging that they were his maternal grandparents and expressing interest in learning about his mother, Diana. "He sounds lost," Margaret told me over the phone. "Broken. But there's something in his letter that gives me hope. He's asking about Diana's character, about what kind of person she was, about whether she would be ashamed of what he's become." "And what did you tell him?" "I told him that Diana believed in redemption, that she thought people could change if they were willing to do the hard work of becoming better. I told him that she would love him no matter what he'd done, but she'd also expect him to take responsibility for his choices and make amends where possible." "Have the other two contacted you?" "Not yet, but I'm hopeful. Family has a way of calling to us, even when we've tried to run from it." After we hung up, I found myself thinking about Diana, this woman I'd never met, but whose children I'd raised. I wondered what she would think of how they turned out, whether she would blame me for their failures or understand that some people are determined to make destructive choices regardless of how much love they receive. I also wondered whether she would approve of what I'd done, the way I'd finally stood up for myself, the boundaries I'd established, the price I'd made them pay for their betrayal. Somehow I thought she would. A woman who had inspired such devotion in her parents, who'd created such loving memories that they'd searched for 30 years to find her children, understood the difference between love and enabling. She would have wanted her children to face consequences for their actions, to learn that love doesn't mean freedom from accountability. As winter deepened and the ocean outside my windows turned gray and fierce, I felt a deep satisfaction with the choices I'd made. I traded the exhausting complexity of toxic family relationships for the clean simplicity of a life lived on my own terms. And for the first time in decades, I was genuinely happy. 2 years after Christmas dinner, I received an unexpected visitor. I was in my garden, tending to the roses I'd planted along the stone wall that separated my property from the cliff overlooking the ocean. It was early summer in Maine, that magical time when the air is soft and warm, but carries the promise of cool evenings and the eternal presence of the sea. "Excuse me, Mrs. Davenport." I looked up to see a young woman standing at my garden gate. She was perhaps 25, with dark hair and familiar blue eyes that made my heart skip a beat. "I'm sorry to bother you," she continued, "but I'm Jessica Morrison. I was married to Jared for about 6 months before everything happened." I set down my gardening shears and really looked at her. She was prettier than I remembered from Christmas dinner, with an openness in her face that suggested she'd learned some hard lessons but hadn't let them make her bitter. "Hello, Jessica. What brings you to Maine?" "I've been wanting to talk to you for 2 years. To thank you. Thank me for saving you from a life you didn't even realize was destroying you." I invited her into the house, made tea, and we sat in my living room overlooking the ocean. She told me about the aftermath of that Christmas dinner, how she'd gone home that night and really listened to the recording of Jared talking about me, how she'd realized that if he could speak that cruelly about the woman who'd raised him, he would eventually speak that cruelly about her. "I filed for divorce the next day," she said, "before he was arrested, before the full scope of his crimes came out. I just knew I couldn't be married to someone who was capable of that level of cruelty towards someone who loved him." "That was smart of you." It was the first smart decision I'd made in years. Jared was very good at making me doubt my own judgment, making me think I was overreacting to things that bothered me. But hearing him talk about you, this woman who'd given him everything, it clarified something for me. She sipped her tea and looked out at the ocean. "I wanted to ask you something, though. Weren't you afraid of being alone? Of not having family? Of what people would think?" It was a good question, one I'd asked myself many times over the past 2 years. "I was terrified," I admitted. For about the first 6 months, I kept waiting to feel the regret, the loneliness, the crushing isolation that I'd been told would destroy me if I didn't have family. But it didn't happen.
No.
What I found instead was peace. Freedom. The ability to wake up each morning and choose how to spend my day based on what would bring me joy rather than what would prevent someone else's crisis. Do you ever miss them? I miss the idea of them. I miss the fantasy of what I thought family could be. But I don't miss the reality of what they actually were. Jessica nodded as if this made perfect sense to her. "I've been in therapy," she said. "Learning about manipulation, about how people use family obligation and guilt to control others. My therapist says what you did was actually textbook healthy boundary setting. Even though it looked extreme from the outside, it was extreme. But extreme situations sometimes require extreme responses." We talked for another hour about healing, about rebuilding life after betrayal, about the courage it takes to choose yourself over toxic relationships. When she left, she hugged me with genuine warmth. "I hope I can be as brave as you are someday," she said. "You already are, Jessica. You already are." After she left, I sat on my porch thinking about bravery, about the different forms it takes, about how it feels to be called brave for doing something that had felt more like survival than heroism. A month later, I received another unexpected contact. This time, it was a letter forwarded through my lawyer from Claire. She was living in a small apartment in Hartford, working 2 jobs to pay restitution and support herself while trying to rebuild her relationship with her children. The letter was different from her previous attempts at contact. No manipulation, no demands, no claims that she was the real victim. Instead, it was a simple acknowledgement of what she'd done and an apology that felt genuine. "I understand why you can never forgive me," she wrote. "I understand that I destroyed something precious through my greed and selfishness. I'm not writing to ask for anything or to try to change your mind about the choices you made. I'm writing because my therapist says I need to take full responsibility for my actions without expecting anything in return. You loved me completely for 33 years, and I repaid that love with theft, lies, and contempt. You deserved so much better from all of us. I hope you're happy now. I hope you found the peace and respect that we never gave you." I read the letter twice, then filed it away without responding. Some apologies deserve acknowledgement, and some deserve the dignity of silence. This felt like the latter, but the letter did make me think about forgiveness. Not the kind that restores relationships, but the kind that frees the forgiver from carrying the weight of other people's failures. I'd forgiven them, I realized, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved to be free from the burden of their betrayal. Forgiveness, I'd learned, wasn't about them at all. It was about me choosing to stop letting their past actions control my present feelings. That fall, Martha from the bookstore suggested I submit my memoir to publishers. "This story needs to be told," she said. "There are so many women out there who are living with family abuse and don't even recognize it because it comes wrapped in obligation and guilt." I've been hesitant to share my story publicly, but Martha was right. The more I talked to other women, the more I realized how common my experience was. How many mothers, grandmothers, and daughters were being systematically drained by family members who saw them as resources rather than people. My memoir, The Last Christmas, was published the following spring. It became a surprise bestseller, resonating with readers who recognized their own experiences in my story. I started receiving letters from women who'd found the courage to set boundaries with abusive family members, to stop enabling destructive behavior, to choose their own well-being over family expectations. The book's success brought speaking opportunities, interview requests, and more attention than I'd expected. But it also brought something more valuable, the knowledge that my pain had been transformed into something that could help others. On the third anniversary of Christmas dinner, I was interviewed for a podcast about family estrangement. The host asked me the question I'd been asked dozens of times. "Do you regret the choices you made?" "I regret that they were necessary," I said. "I regret that 3 people I loved completely chose greed over gratitude, manipulation over affection, cruelty over kindness. But I don't regret protecting myself from the consequences of their choices." What would you say to someone who's facing a similar situation but is afraid to take action? I thought about that question carefully. I'd say that you already know what you need to do. The voice in your head that's telling you something is wrong, that you deserve better, that love shouldn't hurt this much, that voice is telling you the truth.
Trust it.
And if they're afraid of being alone, I tell them that there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. Being alone can be peaceful, empowering, authentic. Being lonely is what happens when you're surrounded by people who don't really see you, value you, or love you for who you actually are. After the interview, I walked down to the ocean and sat on the rocks where I went to think about the big questions in life. The water was calm that day, reflecting the late afternoon sky like a mirror. I thought about the woman I'd been 3 years ago, desperate for love, willing to accept crumbs of affection, convinced that family obligation trumped personal dignity. She felt like a stranger to me now, someone I remembered fondly but could barely relate to. The woman I'd become was harder but happier, lonelier but more authentic, smaller in family but larger in spirit. I'd traded the exhausting complexity of managing other people's dysfunction for the clean simplicity of a life lived according to my own values. It had been the right choice. Not just the smart choice or the necessary choice, but the right choice. As the sun set over the water, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I thought about gifts. The ones we give and the ones we receive. The ones that build up and the ones that tear down. My former children had given me a gift that Christmas night, though they'd never intended it as one. They'd given me permission to stop pretending that abuse was love, that obligation was family, that enduring mistreatment was noble. In return, I'd given them my parting gift, the truth about who they really were, the consequences of their choices, and the freedom to live without the burden of my expectations. My former children had given me a gift that Christmas night, though they never intended it as one. They'd given me permission to stop pretending that abuse was love, that obligation was family, and that enduring mistreatment was noble. In return, I'd given them my parting gift, the truth about who they really were, the consequences of their choices, and the freedom to live without the burden of my expectations. We were all better off without each other. And as I walked back to my beautiful house, my peaceful life, my authentic existence, I whispered the words that had become my evening prayer. Thank you for showing me who you really were. Thank you for setting me free. The ocean whispered back its eternal response. Some endings are beginnings, some losses are gains, And some gifts are perfect precisely because they take everything away. Thank you for joining us on Joy's incredible journey from victim to victor. Her story reminds us that sometimes the most loving thing we can do for ourselves and others is to refuse to enable destructive behavior, even when it comes from family. Joy's courage to choose herself over toxic obligation shows us that it's never too late to rewrite the story of our lives. If Joy's story resonated with you, if it gave you strength to examine your own relationships, or inspired you to value yourself more highly, please share it. Hit that like button to support stories that show women standing up for themselves and thriving on their own terms. Subscribe to her true stories for more accounts of women who refused to be victims and chose to become victors instead. Remember, you don't owe anyone access to your life, your resources, or your peace of mind just because you share DNA or a history. Sometimes the most radical act of love is learning to love yourself enough to walk away from those who don't value what you bring to their lives. In the comments below, share your thoughts on Joy's choices. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? How did you find the courage to choose yourself? Your stories matter, and they might be exactly what another woman needs to hear today. Until next time, remember that some endings are really beginnings, and the most beautiful chapters of your life might be the ones you write completely on your own. This is her true stories. Thank you for being part of our community of strong, fearless women who refuse to settle for less than they deserve.